Good morning, everybody. It's indeed a pleasure to be here with you again this year when we celebrate this Men's Event Day. And for those of you that were present last year will remember that we've had this very interesting discussion around the so-called Banting diet of Professor Noakes. And as we're going to go into this discussion here today, and although the focus is men's health, I would like to us more to focus on men's wellness, because I think it's a much more broader concept rather than just a narrow concept of men's health. But before I go there, I quite often listen to Dr. Eve on radio as well. And she often highlights, and other therapists always highlights, that you've got to be open and do introspection. So I'm going to admit something here now today. I've done my introspection, PJ. Many years ago, I'm going to greet the colleagues. Both my colleagues has greeted them in the 4 official languages of the university. But, we were quite a group following her and her musical career across the bars of Joburg. I'm going to greet you in the way that we greeted them in those days. How's it, brothers? So, I just want to say that's the way we did it in those days. Now with the official Joburg slang as well, a warm word of welcome to you all. It's indeed my pleasure to introduce my panel to you today. I'm just going to give a brief overview, and if I call your name, I'm going to ask you to come and take a seat in front here. And our colleagues will assist you with the sound system. I'm going to first call on Professor Mohammed Hafaji to come to the front. He completed his undergraduate degree in medicine in 1992, worked as a houseman at Chris Hani Baragwanath Academic Hospital. He completed his specialization in urology at the University of Witwatersrand. His current position as professor and head of the division of urology, as well as the clinical head at the Charlotte McKeke Hospital. His interests include neurourology, a range of other activities, and we're really glad to have him on our panel here today. A warm word of welcome to Professor Hafaji. Then we have Gavin Moffat from Mankind Project of South Africa. And he states that he's a common sense seeker, a strategist, a scenario planner, all-round interested human being at join the dots. And then he highlights the following things. He focuses on strategic marketing and communication, business consulting and strategic implementation and conference speaking. He has been fondly referred to as a business pothole spotter and enjoys coffee conversations that allow CEOs and MDs to get honest and forthright feedback, conversation and strategic counsel. Welcome, Gavin. Professor Elna McIntosh has been a sex educator, researcher and therapist for over 25 years. Her entire career has been aimed towards a single set of goals, telling the truth about sexuality, helping people feel sexually normal and powerful, and supporting the healthy sexual expression and exploration of women and men. She explores the goal of a sexually enlightened world through therapy, lectures, writing, TV and radio work. She has regular contributions to medical journals, a talk show on the radio, and also a quarterly sexology magazine. I think very important, she's run 7 comrades, climbed Kilimanjaro twice, done the Ironman triathlon, completed several Dusi canoe marathons and many road races and cycling events. But I think it's very important to highlight that one of the biggest challenges we face in this country from a health point of view is cancer, and she survived breast cancer twice. Dr. Ifongo Bombil is a senior specialist surgeon in general surgery and head of Surgical Unit 5, Endocrine and General. He's a joint staff member at the Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital and the University of the Witwatersrand. He's a devout Christian and derives his moral principles from the Word of God. Welcome here. We look forward to your contributions. Somebody that's very synonymous with acting in South Africa, Jerry Mofokeng, and he's been known for his work in TV, film, or theatre, and he's done it all successfully. He's a South African legend of the stage. He's got an international qualification from Columbia University, where he obtained his master's degree. And he's had a range of activities in South Africa. He's been an associate artistic director at the Johannesburg Civic Theatre, chief director of Mpumalanga Department of Sport and Culture, and finally the artistic director of the State Theatre in Pretoria. He actually also very important away from his acting scripts. He's a church leader and gives marriage counseling and guidance. Also has a radio talk show, and he's also published a book quite recently called In Love and Intimate. Welcome, Jerry. We look forward to your contribution. And then our last panel member is Professor Brendan Barnes, who's a professor of psychology at the University of Johannesburg. He's worked for 6 years at WITS before joining the University of Johannesburg and 8 years at the Medical Research Council. His interests lie in health psychology and in particular the context, for example, poverty and equality, in which health interventions take place. Key questions include what are the assumptions of health interventions in resource-limited contexts and in other domains. He has published widely, he's an NRF-rated researcher, and has received numerous awards for his work. Welcome, Brendan. Nice having you on the panel as well. So maybe just to explain the process, how we're going to follow on, I'm going to make a few opening remarks, but I think the important aspect is that we want the audience to interact with the panel. I'm going to make a few opening statements. I'm going to ask each panelist just in 2 minutes just to highlight some of the health-related issues related to men's wellness in South Africa today and globally as well. And then we're going to open it to the panel. And I just want to make 2 opening statements here. And I'm quoting from Mankind Project of South Africa. Quote, "Today we face serious challenges. Men are faced with tough questions about what it means and what it takes to maintain the strength and power of healthy masculinity without the destructive dominance that we see facing us on the news and in our communities. We need strong men to solve the problems that we are confronting, and yet we also need men that are able and willing to access all aspects of the human spectrum of emotions and actions. We need men who are tough and kind, fierce and nurturing, powerful and compassionate on the one side. On the other side, we look at the South African situation and we look at the top health threats to men. We look at cardiovascular disease and stroke. It's a real problem for us in South Africa. If we look at the top 20 causes of mortality in South Africa, cardiovascular disease number 2, stroke number 3. Cancers, real big problem, especially lung and prostate cancer in the top 20 killers in South Africa. Many of you might not know that depression and associated suicide amongst men in South Africa is the number 14 highest incidence of mortality in South Africa. The challenges around diabetes and erectile dysfunction. So it's a significant challenge that we're facing across a spectrum of activities facing men in South Africa today. And maybe if I can start on the further side there, and if you can just give us, just in 2 minutes, your overview, what are the real issues?
Okay,
we'll get to some solutions later.
Okay, so the one thing about men is that they tend to be reactive rather than proactive about their health. And I think that when you're a man, you should be confidently a man, and it comes with a set of responsibilities. But we can only be there for those that are near and dear to us if we take care of ourselves. And we have no use to them if we're suffering. And people often talk about the leading causes of mortality, as we've talked about. And if you look at the 14 out of the 15 leading causes of mortality, men die sooner than women. And that's a fact. And for us to make an impact, it's important when we look at men's health, it's not just about health. It's about the specific issues that affect men in a very specific way. The diagnosis is different. The way we treat men is different. The interventions are different. And when we look at it, there is something that is gender specific in the way we approach men's health. And yes, it is true, it's not just about health. It's about the psychological, physical, and all aspects of men's health as we go forward. For myself, if I have to say something to you today, if you want to look at the barometer of men's health, it is erectile dysfunction. And that is a message that I carry with me, because erectile dysfunction is ultimately a marker of cardiovascular disease. We talked about strokes, we talked about heart attacks, we talked about depression. All of these things affect erectile dysfunction. So when we see somebody with erectile dysfunction, it is usually an organic cause. So we have to look for the things: diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, depression, testosterone deficiency, the whole loop. So if you had to look for one marker, one thing that defines men's health, one barometer, one dipstick, it has to be erectile dysfunction. But we'll talk about that later.
Thank you very much. Kevin?
So I come from a different space, and my space is not about mortality. So everybody knows what kills people. What I'm more interested in is what allows people to live. What is it that provides men with a space that allows them to be able to live every day as a genuine, authentic man? What is it that gives them the tools to be able to deal with the challenges that they face every single day, whatever those challenges may be? And I'm more interested in it from that perspective. And that perspective is about total health. And once we start understanding what the hot buttons are from what allows you to live every day as a good human being, I think then the mortality part starts to take care of itself. Because I think that mental health is a really critical part in how we live. And it's not just in how we live, it's in how we impact everyone around us. Because as men, we impact everyone that we touch. Sure, women impact everyone they touch, but because it's still predominantly a male-dominated society, our impact can be greater, and therefore we have a greater responsibility to ensure that what we do has a positive impact.
Thank you. Mr. McIntosh?
So it's an interesting ratio because it actually looks nothing like this out there, ladies. In your 20s, you have a 1 in 3 chance of finding a husband. I did. In fact, all the men in my life, all my husbands have been men, yes. Then, in your 40s, 5 to 1 chance, second husband. So now I'm reaching a whole new different stage. And in the old age home, guys, if you can just get there, 10 to 1. 10 old women waiting for that one man. Cigarettes are actually one of the biggest causes of erectile dysfunction. So for the smokers out there, each time you're doing that, there goes another erection, and there goes another one. Please stop smoking.
Thank you. Dr. Bomba?
Thank you very much, Chairperson. When God created man, he asked him to have dominion over the earth. But unfortunately, man cannot have dominion if he's not healthy. And when you consider health in all its components, spiritual, physical, and mental, then you understand that a man is a spiritual being that lives in a body, and they've got soul where they reside mind, will, and emotions. So for a man to be healthy, to do his job, he needs to have a belief, and the belief will impact on his life in general, and sexual life in particular. And the spirit is the generator that drives the body as well. And for the body to be healthy itself, there are some factors that you need to fulfill. You must be healthy, exercise is very important, the lifestyle that you have, and the recreational drugs, and the cigarettes as mentioned here, and all of them affect men's health. And the underlying disease, like diabetes, hypertension, all impact on men's health. And eventually, the mental aspect of men, the stress environment you're living in, how do you respond to it, with all these 3 components will eventually affect men's health in general.
Thank you very much. JD? Mr. Mufokeng?
You should have started this side.
We're going to start another round on this side, I promise you.
Let me do it like an artist. Let me give you 2 statements to think about. 1, character maketh a man. Character maketh a man. And let me just say, if you say a person has become rich and therefore they've become arrogant and what have you, no. The money has made it possible for them to afford doing those things that they could have wanted to do whilst they were poor. And so, if you think AIDS is spread in the shacks, no, it's spread in the Hilton hotels. And so we can afford it when we are wealthy and when we are powerful. And so, without dealing with the character of the person, you're wasting your time because you're dealing with the fruits of who that person is. Number 2, you cannot give what you don't have. You cannot give what you don't have. We might have to deal with men who abuse, men who steal, men who lie, men whatever. But think about apartheid time without blaming apartheid. There's a bar and a bottle store next to every train station. And these men, after being frustrated, they go to the bar, and one man every weekend, he throws a hosepipe on the rest of his family and kicks them. Why? He's angry, and you talk about a man's ego, not in a scientific way. A wounded man wounds other people. And so all the abuse, we were talking about an engineer that's honoring his sweetheart every weekend. He's certificated, but he's not educated about how to do life. And you can't give what you don't have. Let me end with a story. An elephant and a scorpion crossing the river. And scorpion says, please give me a ride. I can't swim. The elephant says, never, not you, because I know you're going to bite me. The scorpion says, brah, don't listen to other people. This one time, I'm not going to bite. It says, hey, scorpion, I know you. I've heard. It says, brah, please, man, you won't even feel the weight. So they get into the river, and the elephant, it doesn't feel the water and the storm and everything. And the scorpion starts dancing. Oh, la elephant. And gets excited, and boom, the tail goes. Says, brah, I told you. Says, no. That was a mistake. I promise you that was a mistake. The tail, not me. I promise you. So, you know, and then keeps going along. And then the elephant realizes, no, this time it's too deep and I can't swim. And it skips and balances, and when it says, ah! Over elephant, boom, another bite. Anyway, by the time they get to the other side, there have been 50 bites. Says, listen, bruh, I'm sorry. I can't help it. And that's my problem with the way in which we deal with men. We treat men in our society. We treat men as though they are invalids. They cannot help it. When the professor cheats with a student, he can't help it. He's a man. And I'm saying it's about time we treat men as people who have the capacity to have character. And let's stop soft handling, soft peddling, and treating men as invalids. It's possible to have a few good men in our society. And let's deal with that. Let's address that. It might take some wrestling, and please understand, you deal with the sexual issues and temptations. The man's problem is not between the legs, it's between the ribs. Let's deal with it from there.
Thank you. That's very difficult to beat. I'm glad I heard so. From my side, I guess the mental health and optimal mental health is where I'm coming from, and the question of how we can enhance men's mental health is particularly important, and particularly in relation to wellness and well-being. The other thing is looking at the actual behaviors men engage in. You know, we know for a long time now that men engage in higher risk behaviors. We know they do certain things. We know that they're reactive, and in relation to their health anyway. And we know that they tend to live much shorter lives. And the question is why, and what are these key issues that we can talk about, and how we can, in some ways, enhance positivity, but also to try and dissuade men from doing some of the things that they engage in. The third thing I think is important is to really get to grips with this idea of what is a man in the 21st century. What is a man in Johannesburg? What are the characteristics of this thing called a good man? I think it's very easy for us to clump all men together into this big category of men. But we see what we think of as masculinities performing and showing themselves in different ways with different men. And I'm very encouraged every day to see men doing things differently. And it's not drastic things, but certain things in relation to how they are rethinking their lives, rethinking their relationships, and rethinking their health. So that's the kind of issues that I would be interested in.
Thank you very much, Professor Barnes. Just a reminder that there will be colleagues collecting the questions from you. If those colleagues can just raise their hands so that the colleagues in the audience can see, that they can address their questions to them. And you're welcome to bring it to me then and we'll address it. I think a number of issues has been put on the table here. And what's very important, it comes through from a number of our panelists, is the whole notion of total health. The mental health side, let's call it the softer issues for lack of better wording. But the question I want to pose to the panel, how acceptable is South African men to address those issues? I mean, just maybe I can start with Professor McIntosh. Isn't there a resistance from South African men to deal with the health issues and also the broader issues around it?
No, in 1998, Viagra launched, but a few other things happened as well. Bill Clinton didn't have sex with that other woman, and Robert lost his penis. So it was a whole, and that almost started giving us permission. Dr. Eve started a radio show when, Dr. Eve? 21 years ago. And platforms like this started, and so we speak more and more, but yet, by the time we see men in the practice, Prof. Hafaji can say that, the surgeons can tell us that the cancers, the diseases are so advanced. So how do we make it easier for men? And I think it's women. It's the woman or the partner that has to say, no, darling, something is wrong here. I don't want to be a statistic. What is the average age of men dying now? 42, isn't it? What is the South African statistic?
In South Africa, it's in the mid-50s.
Yes, life expectancy for male South Africans is 59 at the moment. Average life.
Oh wait, there's still hope for me. I thought I'm going for a big 10 now. Okay, yeah, it is better. I think it's events like this. We have to. It's about permission giving. It's okay. You can do it.
So your question is around what I perceive as a toughness of man thing that South Africans have. I've been involved in Mankind Project now for 5 years, and my perception is that men are generally too tough from an exterior point of view to want to actually approach many of the topics. So I won't deal with the physical aspect of it, just the mental aspect of it. They're too tough. They're not wanting to do the introspection that's required. They're hesitant to do that introspection. Just to ask the tough questions like, so why am I here? What am I doing? When I get angry, why am I angry? What just popped up and made me so angry that I actually want to punch that taxi driver? Because it's got nothing to do with that taxi driver whatsoever. He just happens to have been there, and that's how your anger welled up. He was a fulcrum, but that's it. And I think that in general, South African men are resistant to it until they get to see somebody else who's actually gone through a process of self-discovery, and then they can see a different kind of person that they can be, and then there's a bit of an opening up to go, so I don't have to be like this, I can be another something. I can be somebody who, when somebody says, so how are you, I don't just have to go, yeah, I'm great, thanks. I mean, isn't that one of the biggest crimes we have? When we speak to our friends or our family and they go, so how are you? And you go, I'm great. Are you? Are you really great? Hey, how often do you actually want to go, I'm really crap. I had a horrible weekend, you know, the Boks lost. No, that wasn't last weekend. I've had a bad, and you want to share. And generally I find that men are not wanting to move into that space because that's vulnerability. And being vulnerable is something that in general is not just South Africa, it's around the world. Vulnerability is something that's definitely frowned upon because it doesn't fit into that men's health cover. When I say men's health, what do you see on the cover? Six-pack, bulging arms, the whole number. And vulnerable, I don't know, would you put vulnerable against any of those pictures on the men's health cover? I wouldn't. And I think that's the stereotypical image that's a problem.
Just before we come back to some of the clinical aspects, clinical related aspects, the point that Professor Barnes has raised, what is a man in the 21st century? How much does that contribute to the state of men's health in South Africa? Because I many a time get the impression that Men is not sure what they should be, and they're secondly not sure what's expected of them in a changing environment, in a changing socio-logical context, range of other issues. Brendan, if I can pose you, how do we approach that? What is the key questions? What are the key topics around this whole aspect of what is a man in the 21st century?
Yeah, it's a very difficult one, and certainly researchers are busy understanding this idea of masculinity in relation to health. It is a very tough one because as times have changed, and in particularly in South Africa, where we have to admit that we've been through several hundred years of oppression, of men being involved in terrible things, where men are also blamed as well as being victims of terrible atrocities. It is a difficult question. I'm not sure I have the answer, but certainly day to day I'm seeing men rethinking their lives, rethinking their work-life balance, rethinking the relationships they have with their children, rethinking. I know several stay-at-home dads, for example, which was unheard of even 10 years ago. And it's really, in some levels, quite emasculating to some people, but I think incredibly important in this day and age to think about that. How they contribute, whether they see themselves as breadwinners only or as meaningful parts of their families, their communities, their society at large. So no clear answers, Andre, but I certainly think it raises a number of things in relation to what is a man. And if I may add, more and more recently, what does success mean to a man? And I think more and more so, we are being driven day in and day out by many stressors, but also this idea of what success means as a man. Is it to make money, especially young men? Is it to drive that car? Is it financial well-being? Is it status in the community? Yeah? And with that, the other side is all these stressors that come with that. Debt.
I think just an insight, and I think one of the things when we look at is the concept of fatherhood. And I think when you look at fatherhood, you're not looking at biological fathers. We're talking about role models. The greatest father we've had in this country is Nelson Mandela. He wasn't a politician, he was a father. And if we look at that example, that is where we went. And it's the concept of fatherhood, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in a single parent, for example, family, but you have a grandfather, you have an uncle, you have an older brother. And it's about that example. And I think one of the things that we lack in South Africa is fathers. And it's that role model that you need to follow. And I think, for example, when you say, how can I make a difference? It's being an example, but it's about being a father. And it's in your workplace. If I'm a consultant, I have registrars, I have medical officers. Yes, I'm not their biological father, but it's about being a father. And I think that's a concept that can be expanded into the work environment, personal environment. And often you say, how can I make a difference? It's about that example. And for me, that's the starting point. It's about confidently being a father, confidently being a leader. Someone once said, a single mother, and she said, he's the 14-year-old, he's the head of the household. That 14-year-old cannot be a head of a household. He is a child, and he needs an example. So if we have to make an example about something, it's about fatherhood.
Jerry, I do recognize you, and I'm going to come to you right now. But I think it links to one of the questions we have from the audience, which asked the question, we spoke about fatherhood and role models. Does the way we raise our sons have an impact on their mental wellness later in life? Yeah. Jerry, can I start with you, and you can do your first comment and then comment on the question as well if you would like to?
Yeah, I guess my comment will also address that question. Just two comments. One has to do with the definitions that we get of manhood. From our media, the hip-hop stars and the drug lords and the kind of people that our young men want to become, who are the men who seem to be successful, and there is very little that works to mitigate against those images of men, because what tends to happen is if you can do these things and get away with it, that's when you're a real man. And that is the standard that's set out there. Number two, you will not solve a problem or an issue or a challenge until you call it by its name. If you do not admit that you're a thief, you are a cheat, you will not deal with that issue. And we do not put ourselves in amongst friends and environments and literature that helps us to continuously put a mirror in front of ourselves. We go to the bar and we go to the golf clubs and we go to those places where people continue to say, it's all right. And I think it's about taking those opportunities, whether it's this forum and the work that's been done through one of our colleagues over, whatever forums it is, that begins to heal the men inside so that what we're looking at outside can begin to make a difference. And so please understand, when we judge the men out there, they are made by both men and women. Both. Mothers tell their daughters, these dogs, this what have you. And then when the daughter is 23 and the mother begins to say, oh, what's wrong? They're having to meet someone. The question is, which dog should I have a relationship with? Because you've always taught me that men are dogs. And so both sexes need to raise balanced men. And we start with them from before they are born. Before they are born. And every step of the way is a teachable moment. And we take responsibility for what we teach those people with what we say and what we model. What we say, and by the way, it takes a real man to love. It takes a real man to love. You should be the first man to kiss your daughter, to love your daughter, to forgive your son. We don't forgive. The sons go to prison, the mothers go there. We reserve the right never to forgive, and yet we continuously mess up and don't expect everyone to brush it aside. And it takes real men, to love and to forgive and to do those softer things that really build character in the little boys.
Thank you. Over to you.
Yeah, by default, a human being tends to be lost. When I was a child, I was raised by a mother and father. We wish the father were not there because he's there to control us, because every time we want to be naughty in our life, but the parents were there for education. If you look at our life today, one thing characterizes this century is the parent becomes so busy. It's very uncommon to see a parent in the house after work. So the children are left on their own. As a consequence, they resort to drugs and alcohol and then destroy their minds. That's what's happening in that situation.
While you on that point of alcohol consumption, and maybe, Elna, if I can come to you on this one, you've alluded in your opening statement about the impact of smoking. But one of our audience members would like to know, how does alcohol consumption affect your erections? And is it the same as smoking?
I think it's worse.
I think there's a very large study. It was called the Interheart study, and this was done some time ago. And what the study looked at was cardiovascular disease, heart disease, stroke, etc. And the conclusion of the study was that 90% of cardiovascular disease is preventable. So yes, smoking and that. When they looked at the issue of alcohol, okay, and yes, I'm Muslim, but I'm talking from a factual base. It was found that up to 2 units of alcohol a day can potentially be cardioprotective, okay? And this particular study did not say whether red wine was better than any other spirit, what it said, but it said that potentially up to 2 units a day could be cardioprotective. You lose that when you exceed that. So to answer your question, from a evidence base, and it's often very difficult to moderate or stop it to, I don't know what the answer is, but up to 2 units, it's cardioprotective. Anything beyond that, you lose the protection.
Could the medical people assist here? My understanding is that alcohol is a depressant. It doesn't get you more active. And yet, the only thing that it helps you to do is to be more brave to do what you wouldn't do sober.
So even Shakespeare wrote about it. I had to do Shakespeare so many years back, but Shakespeare said the alcohol, and then you feel so strong, but then it doesn't work. And that is usually what happens. So smoking chills you, you don't really want to fight, but alcohol, in some men, make them really anxious, violent. In my practice, we call it Regret Monday. Monday is always for all the regret things that happened over the weekend, and they're usually the men who have done really crazy things sexually, and then I feel like the Pope or a Catholic priest, forgive me, Father, because I've sinned. They just forgive me, I've sinned. And in a whole long story, the women on the street corners were pretty, and so alcohol make men do crazy things. So yeah.
Yeah, delusions of grandeur, they call it.
Okay, so I think we've got the answer to that one. I just want to get this one out of the way because we often hear it on radio talk shows as well. This whole concept of what is normal. So when we look at penis size, what is normal? What's the definition of normal? I mean, who would like to give it a let's start.
I think give it to the surgeon.
So the average penile size, and when you measure a penile size, there are different ways of measuring. There's the erect length, which you measure from the tip of the penis to the top of the pubis. There's something called the stretched penile length, which almost approximates the erect length, and obviously there's the flaccid length. And the last study that was done by the BJU, the average penile size in terms of the erect length was around about 13 centimeters, plus minus 2. Okay, that's probably where it is. Okay. Having said that, there are obviously regional. There are actually regional variations. There are regional variations. And for example, obviously, if you look at the two Koreas, both North and South Korea, and they fight at each other, they collectively have the smallest penile lengths in the world. You know what I mean? And obviously, as you get towards South America, Central Africa, average penile length sometimes does increase. The definition of a micropenis, which is a really tiny penis, okay, is anything less than 5 centimeters. So the thing about penile length is that 99% of men have a normal penile length. And it's usually a perception that my penis is small, okay? And it's an unfounded perception. So in most cases, and I see it all the time, one of the commonest consultations I have is a father bringing his young son to me, and he's worried about his young son's penile length. Okay? Now, it's a true story. I had one last week. And you know what the biggest cause is? The little kid comes in and he's chubby. He's been eating pizzas and everything. And I say to the dad, he pays me for the consultation, which is really wonderful. And I say, let's push the little fat away there. Can you see? It's normal. And if you lose 20 kilograms, it is normal. And so the whole thing about penile length is a perception. And almost all men have normal penile length. It's the exception that would have a micropenis. So it's a reassurance.
Yeah. And there's an example of exactly what a father shouldn't do, is take his child in, because guess what? His child now has a complex.
Yes.
No matter what anyone says to him for the rest of his life, he's going to think he's got a small penis. So well done, Dad. That's not being a father.
The point I wanted to put to you is that we get bogged down in this concept of total health, or what do we perceive as normal?
Sure.
And we're not sure what normal means anyway. So how does that impact on our relationships then? Because I might be thinking, oh, I should be this or I should be that, and I'm afraid to do this, I'm afraid to do that, because I don't understand the concept of normality.
Do you think that most people are conscious enough to think that they are normal or aren't normal? Or do you think that they're just bumbling along on their daily lives, just being?
I think maybe I'm bumbling along.
I think it's very possible that as human beings, I have, for a great length of my life, I've just been me. And I haven't bothered asking any of the questions about, well, so what makes me a good father? What makes me a bad father? A good husband? How do I contribute to the life around me in a way that actually is additive and not subtractive. And I think that that's one of the challenges, is that we need more introspection, we need more questions. We need to be asking each other more questions, and we need to find environments to be able to ask those questions so that we can establish what that normal is. And I think a lot of it is focusing on the wrong stuff. Yes, we have to focus on the really important medical things because, hey, otherwise we'd be dead. But we need to focus on stuff that's actually about what happens every single day. What are we physically doing every single day that is making us a different person? So, how many people are actively involved in a charity where you use your hands to do something? Can I have a show of hands? How many people do you think it should be in this room? Half of us? All of us? Right, and this is part of the conversation we have to have, is we're all talking about this stuff, but how much are we actually doing? How many of us are actually going into Hillbrow and contributing, going into Soweto, going into Yeovil? It doesn't matter where it is. How many of us are actually doing it? And we can have this conversation as a panel as much as we want. But unless we physically get up on Wednesday morning and we decide I'm going to do one thing today that I didn't do yesterday that's going to make an impact, we'll have the same conversation next year at the same event. So I think it's really important that we actually do a small little thing every day to make a difference.
Thank you.
Can I?
Yes, please.
In counseling, quite often, men will come and say, what do women want? All right? And then you say, bruh, simple. They want you before your things. Now you know. But to actually give you before your things, there's a huge resistance. And I just want to say the secret lies in the ability and the willingness and the volunteering to get some education that empowers me to be someone better. For myself, for my partner, and for my kids. Your son wants you to be there when he scores the first goal. You can't outsource fathering. You can't do that.
It's to an iPad.
Please understand, I often say, when you take care of your children on a Saturday, even though there's a match, you're not helping your wife, you're helping yourself. You're fathering, you're not babysitting. But it takes a lot of personal re-education to do that and to understand it and see the value in fathering. But you can't outsource yourself.
Brendan, maybe I can pose these questions to you because you alluded much earlier to the changing role of the man in the 21st century, being a home caregiver and a range of other issues. I think it's two issues that's very relevant to South African society today. The first one is, my wife earns more than what I do, now what? I think a second one, that is happening much more in South Africa, but people just don't talk about it. My wife beats me. I mean, just some quick comments on that.
My wife beats me is the question.
Oh, my wife beats me. It's home violence, but just the opposite side that we normally hear about.
Yeah.
Over to you.
So the first question to me sounds more like gendered roles and what is expected of a man. I know many men and many families, women in the family who actually agree with this, that a man should always earn more than a woman. I've seen it time and time again when a man becomes unemployed, but refuses to adopt a different gendered identity in the family. He's got a highly skilled wife who, in fact, is expected to stay at home. So what you have, essentially, are two people who are being done a disservice, including the family. And in many instances, because of the lack of appreciation of the role of a man and a woman, you find this family in a particularly difficult situation. What is sensible is for the father to be able to take some more of the responsibilities, to let the mum perhaps go and work, to be able to adopt certain behaviors within the household, to contribute meaningfully, not just financially. So that's just a small example, but it is an example nonetheless of this idea of what is a man and what is a woman, and what should a man earn. And I would applaud. In fact, my wife does earn more than me, and I'm really happy at the end of the month. She does work for the university. So, again, it comes down to this idea. of what a man is and what he's expected to provide, especially financially. The other question around domestic violence and gender-based violence is, actually, again, it reminds us that women are not always what we think they are. Men are not always what we think they are. There's such a range of issues that happen in relationships that affect that. Some of the angriest and perhaps most hostile and perhaps skilled in street fighting have been women that I've seen. And it's not, again, it's not necessarily that women shouldn't beat their husbands and so forth. It is about this idea of what women are expected to be. And I've come across some really interesting research also on female sex offenders, for example, recently. The first thing is like, oh my goodness, can women do that? Of course they can. Of course they can. But we are holding on to these ideas of what a man is and a woman is. And when we see certain things violating that or pushing up against that, Andre, we tend to start getting panicked, and we don't know how to be able to understand that.
Just before I give you an opportunity, I've just been sensitized that Rukaya's eyes are big on me. We're running over time here. I think it's a very interesting discussion. So I'm going to allow you to respond. I'm just going to start on this side as I promised, Jerry. Just
Please.
for each panelist, just to make a 1 minute, some final comments, please. But your comment first.
Just an interesting thing. We've recently done a study on gender-based violence, and we looked at students, both medical students, first 1 to 6, and we looked at social work students, years 1 to 4. And one of the assumptions that we make is that when you go to a university, you're immune to gender-based violence. So we thought we'd just do a dipstick and we'll see what the prevalence of gender-based violence and interpersonal violence is. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole study, but here are a few interesting things. Females are just as likely to be perpetrators of violence as men. That's the first fact. There's also a perception out there that almost all violence is perpetrated by men against women. And some people will say, but when women perpetrate the other way around, it's of a lesser nature. There's no research to suggest that. So one of the things that we need to understand is that interpersonal violence is a two-way street. So women are just as likely to perpetrate it as men. So here's a little scenario which I thought you may want to play out. It's Saturday night and you end up at Yeoville police station and you say, my wife beat me up. What do you think the policeman's going to do? Exactly. Now, let me give you another scenario. If a woman gets battered, there's a center for women that have been battered. If your dog is beaten up, he goes to the SPCA. They looked at the number of male shelters in the United States. Fido has got a better chance of going to a place of safety than a man who's been battered. So interpersonal violence. And one of the other things that a corollary of that is that if we don't recognize females as being perpetrators of violence, how are they going to get help? So I think that there's something that that lid comes off. And it's only when you look at research, and certainly this is not isolated research, it's a two-way thing. And that's something that needs to be recognized as well.
Thank you. Some concluding remarks, starting with you, Brendan?
I guess just coming back to the need for mental health, to talk about mental health. We know from various studies, some of them better than others, that a significant number of South Africans are experiencing psychological distress. Probably the most reliable estimate is about 30%, one in 3. And that tends to manifest different in men and women. The really shocking thing, Andre, is that 3 out of every 4 people who are experiencing distress are not seeking help. And again, that seems to be disproportionately higher for men. And if there's one key message that I could leave this event with is the need to really rethink how we think about mental health, our own mental health, and how we take steps to address those.
Thank you very much. Jerry?
I know I've sounded very hard on men. I just want to encourage us to do 2 things. One is to affirm and build the sense of worth in men. When we have quality men inside, we can expect different results to come out of them. It goes back to what I said, you can't give what you don't have. And we cannot go on a male bashing spree and expect better men in this country. That's Yeah, I forgot my second point.
Thank
so
you
I
very
passed.
much.
Men need a change of mind. When you ask a question about what if a man earned less than a woman, it's causes frustration because a man is perceived to be like a leader and a provider. And if you fail to do so, it affects him. And even if you ask women, I remember I asked a question to the ladies, what if you got a perfect man, but it doesn't have money? And they were not very happy to go for that kind of man. So women view men as a provider, and they don't want to provide for men. That's why men get frustrated.
Thank you very much, Mama.
I'm looking for my Mo sister. Oh, there you are, up there for us. So we're about to go into November, which is known as Movember. Turn around so everybody can see that. Guys, remember, Movember, grow your Mo's. We are the Mo sisters. We don't grow our moustaches, but we support our men. Go on, I don't know, what do we hashtag? I talk as if I know these things, hashtag Movember.com. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Karen.
So for many years, I actually felt bad about being a man. I felt a bit ashamed about being a man because of our country's terribly high domestic violence and rape statistics. And I felt guilty because that's kind of, I'm a guy, you know, I'm a perpetrator. But I sit here today looking each of you males in the face and going, I dig being a guy. It's great being a man. I like being a man. But I want to be the kind of man that makes my daughters proud.
Yeah.
I have two daughters. I have a writing her first matric exam today daughter and an in-university daughter. And I want them both to live in a South Africa where they can find a man who is worth finding.
Yeah.
A man who is honest, authentic, has integrity, and actually treats them the way they should be treated, which is well. There are organizations that are out there that can help you to become that man if that's what you want to be. And I invite you to take a step towards being the kind of man that your daughter or your mother or your aunt would want to be around every day.
Thank you very much, Mohammed.
So, you know, the thing about my significant other is she's a psychologist, and, you know, you always go through this thing that they say to you, as a urologist, we deal at the bottom. They say, go through this period of introspection, you know. And the conclusion that I reached was that I'm a normally maladjusted person.
But high functioning.
And I know this is a journey, and I know where we're going to, but in closing, I would just say that men, we tend to be reactive about our health. We need to be proactive about our health. And if there's one thing you need to do, you need to be a confident man. Yes, be confident about your masculinity, be confident, be gracious to those around you, protect those around you, but do not be an apologetic man.
Right, thank you very much to our panel. Let's give them a round of applause. I think there's still a number of questions, but I think just one message that we've learned from our previous speaker, PJ Powers, is that being a man today, we've also got to apply many of the principles she's applied. Resilience, high levels of resilience. It's really required of us. Endurance. But I think very important, the whole notion of introspection. I don't think as South African males, we do introspection enough. We're afraid to face that truth many a time. But very important, as she's alluded to in her song, let's take it one day at a time, and we will get there. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much to the panel. Much appreciated.
The University of Johannesburg. Rethink, reinvent.